Oh, it's up now. Yep. Uh, does that mean I'm weak? But good morning. Did anyone hear a bell? Good morning. Good morning. A little bit? Good morning.
17 days till Christmas, but that's a pagan holiday.
Okay, I'll do that. Welcome back to our visitors. Welcome. We are in our second week of the new quarter, and our topic is nourishing our roots. Last week, we had an introduction, and this week our topic is belief in God. Now, this is kind of a delicate subject in a way. We will talk about some things from sort of a philosophical viewpoint and then perhaps a more practical viewpoint of bringing it home. Again, I say it's not my intent to offend anybody. You might feel a little uncomfortable at a couple of things that might be said, but stick with us. I think it'll all come out well by the end. For those who were here last Wednesday for Leslie's lesson, he started out saying how this is kind of a scary position to be in. I mean, anytime you stand up as in a teaching position, you take it seriously.
Will all these lessons be available on the website somewhere, in written form?
In written form, no.
No, because if I wanted to share it with someone, I have to take notes.
If you want to take notes, you have to take notes. This is not actually written out. It's kind of sketchy and in my head. Yes. Yes, everything's online. I mean, we're streaming and it's recorded, so somebody could get access to it. Before we get into it, let's begin with prayer. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for your love, for the kindness you've shown us in giving your Son for our salvation. We thank you for your word and the opportunity it provides us to come to know you. We ask your guidance in this, that we can study this and learn more, and that we can grow in our faith and as Christians. We thank you for everything that you provide for us and the many blessings. We ask your blessings of healing and restoration for those that have been struggling with health problems, and for those that are traveling, that you bring them back safely. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, belief. When you start talking about belief, you say you go to talk to somebody and the subject of the Bible and Christianity comes up. What are they going to say? I mean, suppose they're a not believer or they're a non-believer. What are they going to say? What does the little kid on the playground say when they're challenged somehow? Is it true? Show me. Why? Did I hear somebody say, prove it? Prove it. And that's what many have tried to do in one fashion or another. So we'll start with the definition here of prove from the Oxford English Dictionary: to demonstrate or establish, to show that something is true. It's beyond argument. Now, you have the pure logical sense of a proof, which is you start from certain premises, or say, everybody had geometry? Everybody's favorite subject? Proving those theorems and all? You start from axioms, things that are just beyond, they're accepted. Like the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. Nobody's really arguing that. So you start with things that everybody agrees on, and then you proceed through some kind of argument, and if the premises are sound and the process is sound, you reach a sound conclusion. But that's very strict. And that basically assumes that you have absolute knowledge of these things. We're stuck in that we don't have that kind of absolute knowledge when dealing with the Bible or dealing with God. We do not have that vantage point of being omniscient. So we have limitations. We have to admit that. If you were to, there's that very strict sense of proof, but then we get into things that are more practical, such as courts of law. If you have a criminal trial, the lawyer for the prosecution is going to try to prove, they say prove, that the defendant is guilty. The defense lawyer is going to try to prove his innocence. What does that mean? Neither one of them can take you back to the time of the event and say, look at this. This is what's happening. You can see it with your own eyes. What we're stuck with, what they are stuck with, is showing evidence. And the decision has to be made by the jury on the preponderance of the evidence. Does the evidence overwhelmingly indicate this conclusion? If not, you go some other direction. And that's the kind of proof, that's how we have to make decisions. Because we are not omniscient. We don't have all the facts. We don't have everything available to us. We have to make our best judgment on the evidence. Does that make sense? Okay, now there are three broad categories of people when it comes to religious topics. You all read Greek, right? Well, the term atheist comes from two Greek words. Well, a or alpha is the negating prefix. It's sort of like un in English. So a and theos, which is Greek for God. So it's not God. Ist, the one who adheres to or practices. So you have atheos, ist, atheist in English. Then we have the agnostic, which is very similar construction, but it's based on not, and gnosis, knowledge. So you put those together, and you have the one who says, I don't know, or I cannot know. The agnostic's kind of trying to be a fence sitter. Say, well, I can't know, so basically I'm going to do whatever I feel like, because it's up to me. And then you have the theist, which is one who believes and practices. So a question. Let's make sure. Before we get to that, I talked about this proof business and the preponderance of evidence. That assumes that we treat all these things rationally. Are we rational beings? We'd like to think so. But are we really rational beings? By and large, you look at humanity, and people will go buy a lotto ticket. Well, the preponderance of evidence is you ain't going to win. Yet, millions of people still do it. We buy insurances to cover, if anybody's an insurance salesperson, I'm sorry, but we buy insurance to protect ourselves against these very rare events, the extraordinary things. And if we just save our money and put it aside, we could probably cover the expense anyway. But there's a place for it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not bad-mouthing insurance. It's a good thing. But there are aspects of our lives where we just do it because either we're afraid of something or we just want it to be a certain way. And we will rationalize things to be right. We really, really want to be right. And so all sorts of things get rationalized. You know, you have nationalist movements like Nazism and such. And somehow this was rationalized that this is the right thing, this is, for the fatherland and the good of the people and for the superior race and all that kind of stuff. And it's a lot of garbage, but you get people talking about it and everybody's saying it, and then everybody goes with it, even though they know it's not right. Down deep inside, they know it's not right. But we want to have some argument to justify ourselves. Yes?
Is this along the line of Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump?
We'll leave that one. So, question, does the Bible prove the existence of God in the strict logical sense? I see one shaking no. Bill?
Supported by all we see of the earth and nature, yes.
Do you ever find an argument in the Bible where it says, okay, here's the premise? I mean, there's nothing like that. It doesn't actually say, okay, this is why you should believe in God. It points to his works. It presumes his existence. And then goes on to explain things in that context. So we've got a lot of people. Go ahead, Tom.
I was just thinking about that. You see everything that is in existence at this particular time, and it's irrational to think that something didn't
I'm inclined to agree with you, and you just jumped over a whole bunch of what's coming. Phil.
In the New Testament, Christ said, if you know me, you know the Father. We know that Christ existed. Therefore, if we believe his words, then we know that God exists.
But all this is based on faith. Without faith, none of this exists. The Bible doesn't prove itself, as people say it. Because we have faith in what the Bible teaches, and we accept it. But if we don't have faith, there's no way that you can just read the Bible and say, oh yeah, this is fact, this is correct.
Let's hold on to that for a later part of the discussion. Neil?
Go back to the first definition you put up there.
Yes.
Not the proof that was described in that first sentence, that you could apply the scientific method in our 5 basic senses to a worldly sense. That doesn't exist. The Bible will tell us it doesn't exist. What does exist, you ask for reason, human beings. We have the ability to read. And the evidence is available in history. Things God has done with the nation of Israel, for example. Nature itself is destructive. For a reasoning person to look at the world around us, how complex we are, where this man come from, the evidence is in the Bible and in our own lives, in the church, in the life of Christ. For a reasoning person, there is evidence enough to have a reasonable conclusion that we have the basis for the faith that David just talked about. Through our faith, we know God's faith. Through what is available to us as reasoning individuals.
Well, I think we should conclude now. Well, go ahead, Bill.
There's a lot of prophecy and promises that God made happen that came true.
We're getting to that. Let's move on here. The Bible really doesn't offer this kind of proof, but along what has been said several times here, Romans 1:18 through 20 basically says, look around you. What can be known in this sense is obvious. You look at the magnificence of the creation, the complexity, the order. And as Tom was saying, it is beyond imagination to say this just happened. Or maybe we just don't have a good scientific imagination. Now, next question. Can we prove the existence of God? Since the Bible doesn't actually attempt to do this, it just says, hey, there's the evidence.
Well, you can imagine us like a jury. We're presented the evidence by the court, and it's our job to determine what's right and what's wrong.
Adam says we have to be like the jury, and the evidence is given to us. We have to choose. You just took the last slide. Dan.
We don't have to prove his existence on the day of rapture or judgment.
No, we don't. Can we prove it in the most logical sense? No. Because we don't have the vantage point of being able to see everything and know everything and say, okay, now look. We're not there. We're very finite, very limited creatures. However, many have attempted to do this. And we'll run down through a bunch of these arguments that have been made. There are problems with these arguments. One is bias. Okay, the believer is presenting things, and because of our bias, because we already believe it, we tend to take certain things for granted and make logical missteps. I've seen this in a number of videos and things. When you point to someone else's logical fallacies, you can't make the same mistakes yourself. You know, they will point to something and say, oh, well, you did this wrong, but then that bias comes in and you jump to something and say, therefore, my result is true, and you're making the same logical mistakes that others are. You see many debates on this. The debates rarely are really it's really a discussion that's going after the truth. It's one presents their side, the other presents their side, and it usually never gets beyond the straw man level. That is, you put up something, some image that's supposed to be the other person's position, which is really weak and silly, and you knock it down and say, there, I won. Yes? Okay. Strong. And often in these discussions, there's a lack of clarity. One person says, you know, a word like faith, and another says, we talk of faith as a well-founded trust based on experience and evidence. And much of the world talks of faith as some sort of blind choice of, well, you just believe because you want to believe, because it makes you feel warm and fuzzy.
It would be a lot easier if we had lived in the days of the forefathers who God talked to, because then there wouldn't be a question. Now, in today's day, if you said to someone, well, God talked to me, they'd say, well, you're schizophrenic.
Probably.
But there are those who lived during that time when the prophets were telling them certain things, they still didn't believe.
That's true.
So things have changed.
And it says those who heard the prophets, many didn't believe or didn't want to follow anyway. And you see exactly the same thing today, Neil.
When you talk about trying to move outside of faith, doing it as one person without just going in faith, we all get to this. One of the strongest arguments for the existence of God is actually given by those who start out with the opposite premise, trying to prove he does not exist. And the failure for them to do so, we talk about a legal context, where you have two sides making an argument, and where the preponderance of evidence leans one way or the other, and then someone has to make a judgment. When you look at the evidence on both sides of that argument, so many people started out as atheists, trying to get into these debates and take the position there is no God, and eventually Christians. But the evidence is there for a reasoning person. And they can't, the failure, the evidence is there for them to have a logical conclusion that there is not a creator, someone put this in place that's superior to us, has given us an ethical foundation that works for us as human beings far better than the options that are there if you don't have faith.
That's a good point. Let's move on here. Now, I'm going to go through these fairly quickly just to give you a background on some of these classical arguments. First is the cosmological argument. They all have, big names. The cosmos, the everything, the whole creation had to have a beginning. For some time, people said, no, it's been here, it's static. But, okay, we can credit science with this one. We know things are winding down. There doesn't seem to be any input into the universe. That's a strange thing to say anyway. But things are winding down. Energy is dissipating. It's becoming less available. This indicates that somewhere there was a start and it's going toward an end. So it couldn't have created itself, therefore someone had to create it. Tom's point. And so they say there must be God. Another one, the theological argument from purpose or design says, look at how complex things are, how every part has its function. We can look at life today in more detail than they used to be able to, so we can see that every creature, even every individual, has unique DNA. This level of complexity really argues that this did not just come from chance. So there has to be something behind this. So we argue that there must be God. The watchmaker argument is very similar to this, that design requires a designer. We look at the incredible design. You know, we don't mine Rolexes out of the ground. You know, it's not something that's just found with that kind of order. We don't even mine Timexes out of the ground. So there had to be a designer. Somebody had to put this together. And again, there must be an intelligence behind this. The moral argument. Everybody has a conscience. We all have this sense of right and wrong. And going back to what I was saying earlier, we want very badly to be right. And we will argue all kinds of things that the rationalization is to say, well, what I'm doing is okay somehow because we want to be right. We want to have a conscience that is not telling us all the time, you're wrong. Moral doesn't arise from non-moral. I mean, this wood has no morality. And in fact, you look at the animal kingdom, the closest things in creation to us, and we don't see a morality there either. Human beings seem to be unique in this morality. Okay, your dog cares about you. But in the sense of a consciousness of right and wrong, we've got it and others don't. So where does this come from? It seems something had to put this into us. There's the aesthetic argument, which is not very strong, but it says beauty exists. Does a bee care about the beauty of a flower? Really? But beauty is an important thing to us. It has an incredible effect. Wars have been fought, Helen of Troy. I don't know about you. Classical guitar music just kind of immobilizes me. You know, if I'm listening to it, that's it. Nothing else matters. But we have this sense of the aesthetic. It has no real utilitarian function, but it has a very powerful effect on us. Okay, that's not too strong, really. Then you have the ontological argument. Ontology, the study of being. This one says, we can conceive of an absolute, perfect being beyond which nothing else could possibly exist, and therefore, such a thing or such a one must exist. Well, I can shoot that down in 3 words. Well, 1, unicorn. We can conceive of fantasy creatures and such, and that doesn't make them exist. So, you know, it's there. This is one of these classical arguments, but I think it's extremely weak. Now, this one I put a question mark on people talk about natural law, which is not quite the same as the laws of nature. This is getting into philosophical terms, and I hate that stuff. It's just nitpicking bits and pieces. But the laws of nature, we look at nature and we see that things happen according to certain patterns. And the argument that is made is all of nature obeys certain laws, and where there's a law, there must be a lawgiver. And that lawgiver must be God. Oops. This one is not as strong as you'd like to think, because we mix the term law in two different senses here. Human law, or so-called positive law, is something that comes from people. It's arbitrary. Our tax laws change every time there's a new Congress. This is not something that's fixed, binding, immutable. But the laws of, what we call laws of nature, aren't laws in that sense. They're simply the patterns that we observe. And when you observe a pattern and you say it always behaves this way, then we start to call this a law. But you can talk about things like Newton's laws, and for the temporal and spatial scales that we exist in, by and large, they're great. I mean, buildings and rockets and all sorts of things have been made following these basic physical principles. However, when you get down to really, really small things and get into quantum effects, Newtonian physics falls apart. When you get into very large things and very high velocities, Newtonian physics falls apart because you get relativistic effects. So within this range, it's great, but you stretch it out there and it's not a law anymore. But there's a different pattern. It's what we call laws are just the patterns that we observe. And so it's not the same. Had enough? Yes. So why do we believe? The preponderance of evidence. Yeah. Now, Isaiah 55, 8 and 9, if somebody would read that for us.
For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. For if the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts.
So we're talking about believing in someone who doesn't behave quite the same as we do, or who's actually beyond our understanding. In many respects, he's beyond our understanding. Yet he chooses to reveal himself to us such that we can understand and have a relationship with him. All this stuff of looking at the creation and these so-called proofs that we were looking at, they can say they're pretty good arguments looking at all the evidence. Yes, someone or something exists out there that is way beyond us. But they don't bring us to how to have a personal relationship with that one. He has to reveal himself to us. Many religions are man's search for a God. In the Bible, God reveals himself to man. Otherwise, we'd be hopeless. We can marvel at the beauty of a flower or the complexity of a cell our whole lives, and that doesn't tell us how to have a relationship with God, how to behave rightly. He reveals himself to us in that way. we look at the evidence, and there are certain tests that we can apply. And this is sort of a logical process here. Consistency, coherence, and voice. Does he say the same thing? Does it say the same everywhere? I'm not talking about these nitpicky little things of it. It says this here and not there. I mean, if you look at a stoplight and you say, it's red now, and then you wait 30 seconds and it's green, and you say, well, that's not right. It's inconsistent because it's saying two different things. Well, it's talking about two different contexts. And you can't be that shallow in the way that you look at it. But the consistency and the coherence, and that there is one voice speaking to us through all of it, are important. The more I learn, it just all hangs together. It's one. There's one voice. There's one author behind all this. Performance. Bill said how there were many predictions made, many prophecies. Many of them we can see have come true. And of course, there was arguments like the book of Daniel was written much, much later when they could look back and say that's what happened. And so, but then the evidence comes up. No, that book was there before these things happened. So yes, it was a legitimate prophecy. And yes, it has been fulfilled. So there are many, many things that we can look at that way and say, yes, what he said was going to happen did happen. And that gives us confidence to say what he says is yet to happen is going to happen. And then the truth of the statements, do they just agree with what we see around us every day? Do we see any place in nature or humanity or society where things are not explained or predicted? I mean, we look at how bad things are going these days, and we can say we've got a good idea where this is leading to, because it has been shown already. You go this way, this is what you get. Rational. There's a lot of feeling that goes with this stuff. There's sort of a Thomas versus Peter thing here. Thomas, show me the evidence. Peter, jumping in with both feet. And I forget who said something.
No one has ever seen God. The only God who is at the Father's side, he has made it known.
So how do we believe, or why do we believe a choice? And can one be compelled to believe?
I think a lot of it is used up. It makes our Bible better than the Quran or the Book of Mormon. We were raised with the Bible, not with one of those. Had we been raised with one of those, we'd be declaring those true. But again, it goes back to faith. The whole thing, to me, revolves around faith.
We're going to do faith a few weeks from now. It's important. Something. The question was, don't these people that believe in the Quran or something else believe in God? That's a deeper question than we can handle here. Can one be compelled to believe? Since you mentioned the Quran, Islam, they've had this thing of they go into a place and they conquer. And okay, are you going to convert? Well, if you convert, fine. If you don't, then you got to pay heavy taxes. And if you don't pay the taxes, they kill you. You s- That's true. Well, compelling evidence, we have this thing, everybody's surrounded by what we see, but not all choose to believe. Not all choose. So are we compelled to believe? No. It's still a choice. It's true. Some will not believe. Tom.
Read other thoughts on this and so forth. Some people have suggested that it's an instinct to be looking for a God that's built into people. Some things are built into people and they follow it up. Now, not everybody follows it.
About us, why we believe because we want to, or I don't know. We're actually out of time. So. One last comment. It is our choice. And with that, thank you for your attention. We're